Hello and welcome to Her Next Step, the podcast where women in the public service talk about how their passion and their intuition led them to interesting and exciting career paths. We'll hear about the fears and challenges that could have held them back and about the internal and external supports that enabled them to take their next step. I'm Lily Murphy, and I'm speaking to women whose stories will, I believe, inspire you to wonder what stepping stones would help you to take your next step. My guest on the show today is Dr.Jean McGowan. Jean is passionate about creating the conditions where children can thrive in a challenging school environment. Jean's career path from teacher to school principal to her current role as postgraduate researcher and school placement supervisor in the School of Inclusive and Special Education in Dublin City University has not been without its challenges. We'll explore some of these challenges and the passions and motivations that enabled Jean to continually take her next step. Jean, I'm delighted to have you here for Her Next Step. I'm curious to know if I'd stood in front of a group of your peers in national school, secondary school, or your family and said somebody here will have a PhD in educational research, would they have looked at you?
No. And we wouldn't have looked at anybody in our group because that isn't what it was like. That it was, you got a job after school. You either maybe became a teacher or a nurse, or you got into the bank or the civil service. And that was as far as it seemed to go. But even in primary school, I always had an inkling that I'd love to be a teacher.
Did you?
Even way back in those days, and this was kind of the late 70s, when we were in 5th and 6th class, if the infant teacher, and in those days it was infants first and possibly even second at some years, if that teacher was out, the principal would just pick one or two of the 5th and 6th to go in and mind the class, teach the class. We'd hear their reading, when I think of it, we wouldn't do it anything like that nowadays. Yeah. But we didn't think anything of it. We just loved going into the younger children and playing teacher.
Yes,
and that's what we were doing.
Okay.
We were playing but it was always there. I loved the idea of being a teacher.
Did you?
Yeah.
And what was it particularly that attracted you to?
I just think that I liked things like reading, and I just liked it. I liked the order of it. I liked the whole idea of school, and like we used to play school at home, so it was familiar, and that's what I realised. It was something that was familiar to me. I wouldn't have thought of science in those days or anything like that, because you can only be what you see.
That's right.
And of course, I was very fortunate. I had lovely teachers in primary school, so of course that's what I would like to be.
And was going to college something normal for you, for your peers, for your family?
Not exactly normal. I'm from a family of 9, and the sister next to me had gone to college, but had decided this wasn't for her, and she got a job instead. Now, she'd also met her future husband when she was in school, and they had a plan to get together and get married. But she later went back and did teaching.
Oh, wow.
Because in those days, when you went for teaching, you had to do an interview in Irish and English and a musical. You had to sing a song and play an instrument, and we're not musical. And because she wasn't good at music, she said, no, that's not for me. I won't get through. Wow. And she stopped herself. And it was then later on when I did it, and I'm no more musical than she is, she started to think about it again then. And by that stage, she had 2 young children. They were both in school. And she went back as a mature student. So,
wow. Well, yeah. So we might interview her at some later stage on her next
very
step.
Interesting, yeah.
But so you went off to college to become a teacher, fell in love with it, it sounds like.
Not exactly.
No.
No, I was overwhelmed by college.
Were you?
I was completely overwhelmed by it. And that Christmas I did get called to an interview for the civil service and wanted to go. But I was in Dublin, and all my skirts, I was in jeans, college clothes, and I wanted to borrow a skirt from this particular sister so that I could go and do the interview and get out of this. And she said to me, basically, stay where you are. it'll get better. So, she's only 5 years older than me, but she was so wise.
Wow.
And I was annoyed with her. I was kind of saying, all she has to do
For
is
the want of a
loan me the
skirt.
And it's not like nowadays, people just pop off and buy a skirt. But it wasn't like that. It was, I suppose I wasn't comfortable in college. I felt a little bit overwhelmed, more than a little bit overwhelmed by it. I was in a college called Carysfort that has closed down since, and it really was like a secondary school in a lot of ways. And I know it took me quite a while to become comfortable in college, and I saw college just as a way to be a teacher.
Okay.
I didn't really get all the benefits or have the full experience. It was just a way through 3 years, and I'll be out of here.
And then I'll be able to do what I want to do.
Then I'll be able to go back and do what I could do in 5th and 6th class.
Okay.
Basically, that's how I looked at it, because I didn't have a broader view. Even though I loved teaching, and my favourite part of college was when we would go out on teaching practice. Loved that, being out in the various schools, and liked that experience. But no, was quite happy when college was over.
Did you move into one school and stay there, or did you work in a number of schools?
I subbed at the time in the 80s. It was hard to get a job, and I got into a school and had infants from up until the first Christmas, and then that school, there was another school in the next town, and they said, well, we have a sub and she's going to fit. And so I went to that school, and that school got me a job in the next school. And I could see that this, again, looking back, I suppose I wanted a permanent job. That was the mark. You got a permanent job. And there were no jobs being advertised at the time. Later on, I found out that there was something going on. You know, the way they're run by the diocese, and that there was no jobs being advertised in the diocese that I was from. And then suddenly they were all advertised. There was a whole load of jobs advertised, and I got a job. And at that stage, the following June, which meant my friends were organising Interrail, and I couldn't go on Interrail if I didn't have a job, because I wouldn't be paid for the summer. And on the 4th of June, I started a permanent job, and I was away for the summer.
Excitement of it.
Oh, the excitement was great, so yeah. Okay. But looking back on it, like, I was so happy to have a job and to have a class, to know that I was going to have 3rd and 4th class in September, and they were my class. And I was totally content with that, very content with that. Yeah.
And you spent 15 years in the classroom.
I did, yes. When I said 15, I didn't count that subbing in, so 16 in total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mostly with 3rd and 4th class, or did that change?
No, 3rd and 4th, and then infants, and I loved infants, and then I moved from infants up to 5th and 6th, so right through the school, the primary school levels. Never taught 2nd class, and that would be the only class.
And had you a preference amongst those groups?
I loved infants, absolutely loved having infants, and it was the principal, wanted to move the teachers round, and he asked me to move to 5th. And I can remember thinking, wow, this is going to be challenging. No, they were lovely. I never had a class group that I didn't like. So I enjoyed
And I suspect you didn't have a class group that didn't like you.
Well, I don't know now. We might have had our moments. But no, they were the school that I taught in, they were just great children. And there was such diversity in the school, which was wonderful.
Where was that?
Here in Sligo, St. Edward's in Sligo. And, in the early days, we wouldn't have had many multinational students. But, there was always different types of children. And it was kind of learning to meet those needs. But remember now, I still had a thought of teaching as this is what the teacher does to make school interesting for the children. And at that, looking back on it, it wasn't so much about what the children needed. It was more about what I could do to make it interesting and to keep it nice and to keep everybody happy and keep us going. And later on then, I would have kind of changed my views on that.
So, and before we talk about that, I'm curious, during this time, I'm anticipating that you got married and had a family.
Yes, I did. I got married. I suppose I met and married my husband within 2.5 years of coming to Sligo. And again, that's the way things were done in those days. There was no cohabiting or anything allowed. So it was different. But we married, and then a few years later, we had our first child, and then less than 2 years later, we had our second child. So we had 2 small children. And then we had a great surprise 4 years later when we had our little girl. So they're all grown up now, but they were I was very happy being a teacher. And there's huge advantages to being a teacher because you're off at the holiday times. And I was home in the evening. So it was good.
It worked.
I felt very fortunate.
So something happened, Jean. Something happened to cause you to diversify a little bit from just being in the classroom as a teacher.
Around 1993, a senior colleague who looked out for the younger teachers said to me, "There's an opportunity coming up with the INTO. They're going to develop professional learning, and they're looking to get teachers to go and train to be school planning tutors." It meant nothing to me. I said, "Well, that's not for me." And she said, No. She said, "The men are great for going for these things, but we need to get women involved." And she said, you can do it. And so I applied for it with her support. Came home, first of all, and said this. And, my husband said, "Well, go for it." He'd always be quite supportive. But I went for it without, this was something new. I was going to have to go to Dublin for the week. Again, another very supportive person would be our childminder, who's still a very, very close family friend. And it meant that she had to stay on a little bit longer because my husband didn't have the flexibility to be home early. And everybody was supportive. And, at the time, I knew they were being supportive, but it's so long ago now that I was only thinking about it, how supportive people were. But my colleague who had encouraged me to go for it, so I went to do the training. And again, this was totally new. They were talking about working with adults, and you're going to be working with teams from schools and how to bring people with you and how to get people involved in teamwork. So it was very new because I was used to working with children. And I can remember then we all had to take a topic and research it and then present it to the rest of the people that were training, along with those that were training us. And I will never forget my heart rate and my hands shaking. And what was really incredible was that others didn't notice it. They said, "Oh, that came across very well." And I thought, how could it come across very well? I was literally shaking. And it made me think that sometimes others don't see what you're feeling. But at that, we had that week of training, and we had a good bit of learning to do. But then that summer, we went and we worked with the school staff, and we worked with them about team building and team planning and taking curricular areas, whatever the school needed. So, that was an incredible experience.
It was also very innovative at the time, I suspect. Working as teams wasn't something that happened in schools.
See, when you think back to the 90s, there was a lot of change coming in education. Again, I was in my classroom and I was perfectly content and I wasn't really worried about what white papers or green papers were going on. But it sort of made you think about where policy is going. And that was about 93 and 94. And then in 1998, we had the Education Act, which was all about school planning and things like that. So in fairness, the professional development unit of the INTO was very innovative, as you say, and they were forward thinking. So it was a fabulous opportunity that I wouldn't even have considered without the guidance of a wiser person with experience.
That's such an important thing. Maybe for our listeners out there, there are people, older, wiser, as you say, peers watching their younger colleagues coming into workplaces. What's your advice now to those older, wiser people?
I think it's really important to engage with the younger people coming into the profession. And very often, there's been a transition, that very often they can come in with huge, maybe IT skills and audiovisual skills. And maybe sometimes older teachers feel, oh, well, let them off, they're great. But we have a lot to share. I think it's the sharing that the older teachers have a lot of experience to draw on and a lot of guidance to give. And, you know, for the younger people to listen and engage with them. Don't think they're old phobies.
Yeah.
You know? And similarly for the older people to believe in themselves and to share their wisdom, you know.
Yes, really important. And to share opportunities and encouragement.
To encourage the younger ones to follow through on things.
Yeah.
You know, that when you have experience, you know, like when they're comfortable in their role and they know what they're doing, you know, what do you want to do with it? Doesn't mean they have to go off and do something else, but maybe to research the practice, become reflective. Again, I would say that now. I wouldn't have said that then. Yeah.
I'm also struck by what your colleague said about, you know, men will go for those opportunities and women won't. What do you think held women back then?
I was a primary school teacher, and it is mainly females, women that are primary school teachers. And generally at the time, it was the men that rose to the top. They were the principals. They were kind of the leaders of the union. But there were women in the union that were, you know, kind of creating and disturbing things and creating change, which was good. But at the time, I think that, like, to go back to me in school, if I got to be a teacher, well, that was that. I had succeeded.
So it was almost, was it a lack of ambition?
You didn't see many women. You didn't see many women being out there and confident. And along with that, you know, your role, if you had children, was, you know, you were a mother and you were a teacher. And that was it. You were consumed by all of that. So there wasn't an awful lot of space made until you got an opportunity to make the space. The space is there.
But I'm also wondering then, you know, for you personally, you had to make a decision to leave your children and go to Dublin. Did you have any doubts about that
No.
from a maternal point of view? No.
I did a little bit, but not really, because their father was with them, but also their childminder, who was like another mother. You know, and that's the role. And I've thought about it since, because she stepped in for many things going through my career. You know, the person that supports you, that looks after your children. Like, I never worried about my children when I was at work or away. When I went to work, they were cared for. That was it. And probably, you know, with far more attention. Or, you know, like, she was wonderful. Breda is her name. Breda is her name. And she was absolutely wonderful. Even if they had a bit of a sniffle or a cold when they were babies. Once Breda was there, if there was anything to worry about, she'd ring me and tell me. And if not, she was in charge.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a shift for you in some ways from seeing yourself just as a teacher, so to speak, to seeing something different. And what was it that you saw?
There were the people that were training us. They had all done research and they knew so much about the broader aspects of education. I really wanted to know, how did they have such knowledge and confidence? And I was chatting with one of them, and she said, if you're interested, start reading, read broadly, read about education. And again, an opportunity came up to do a master's with the Open University. At that time, there was no way I could go to a college, and it wasn't available in Sligo at the time. So with the Open University, and there was 3 modules, and the first module I picked was adult education, because I was so interested in these courses that we were running and learning more about it. But ultimately then, I wanted to learn how to be better at teaching, because the difference that I was discovering was, it's not what you do, it's what the children need, where they're at in their journey of conceptual development or where they're at. And that's where you start. My next modules were on assessment and the primary curriculum, and teaching and learning in the primary curriculum. And that was very beneficial for me as a teacher, because I felt that I could get to the children's needs better, you know, in the classroom.
And did that in any way then set you apart from the other teachers in the school?
No, there were, around the same time, there was a lot of other teachers. We were fortunate now. I know we had a principal who was very supportive and very encouraging and very go-ahead. So again, it was fortunate. It was very, very fortunate, because he would have been very encouraging of me and other teachers going forward doing further courses. Like I can remember at one stage, a few of us wanted to do the course. There was a course on out in St. Angela's, and a few of us wanted to do it, and he could only pick one, and it wasn't me. but there was a lot of people wanting to do things.
Yeah, so you pursued it, and you found a lot of support amongst your colleagues.
But the funny thing was then that they were bringing in a revised curriculum, and because I had studied assessment and the curriculum, I applied to go on secondment for a year to work on the introduction of the curriculum. So I got the opportunity of working with a national team, and it was the first time this had happened, well, in my career time anyway. And I went out with this team, and the people that I met, they were really amazing. They were doing further study, further research. They were really involved in their in knowing more about education, and it was an eye opener, like the first one had been. You got energized by them. You got energized, and you wanted to.
You can absolutely hear it, and the passion.
Yeah.
But the passion was about education.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, because my family, I'm from a family of 9, and my mum would have had huge investment in making sure that we were all well educated, because, as she said, there was nothing to leave us. Therefore, we had to be educated and get out there and get our own career or secure job or whatever. And that's the way she looked at it. And I always thought that it was the same for everybody. Just make sure that you teach the children really well and you set them up for life. But at the time, I did not realise that it's not simple like that, that there are barriers in some people's paths that prevent them from benefiting from the education that's provided. We have an education system, and at the time it was very, there wasn't as much focus on special needs or diversity or anything like that. So the system didn't suit everybody. Whereas when I started teaching, I thought, if I am a good teacher and I make sure that the children can read and write and add, subtract, multiply, and get them ready for secondary school, that they'll be set up. But there are so many barriers that come in people's way. Like some of the brightest children that I know, later on in secondary school or later, they didn't follow the path that I would have foreseen for them. So, I really think that that's something that we have to be aware of. When you come from a family that, the support is there for education, a lot of barriers just don't exist. You just get on with it. There's time to do your homework, there's space to do your homework, there's encouragement, etc. There's a myriad of things. There can be bad health in the family. There can be kind of all sorts of different issues that put barriers into other individuals' ways.
And what were you learning about how you as a teacher could overcome those barriers or help kids to overcome those barriers?
It's just knowing where the children are at, and it developed further. But at that time, I can remember one of the research projects that I was doing when I was doing a master's was find out where the children are at. And it was a simple thing to do with volume. And we had glasses and we were pouring water from one glass into the other. We had a small glass, a big glass, etc. But everybody knew which was more and which was less. This was senior infants now. Which had more water, which had less water. And then finally I had a tumbler that was broad and short, and I had a long, narrow tumbler. And I poured the water full from the long, narrow tumbler into the short tumbler, and it filled that as well, so it held the same. And I asked the children, which holds more? And it was amazing. One particular little girl, she said the tall one holds more. So we did it a few times. And there was no point in saying to her, no, they hold the same, because she wasn't at that stage of seeing. To her, tall is bigger, therefore it holds more, even though in front of her eyes she could see them going from one to the other. And that's what I'm saying, that whether it's your understanding of volume, or it's your understanding of language, or your mathematical understanding, whatever it is, you have to find out where the child is at. We started to get children from other cultures. And the things that you take for granted in the Irish system, aren't natural to them. And it's just to become aware of that sort of multicultural understanding. So I had that year, and then the principalship of the school came up. And I was initially reluctant, but it was my husband that really said, but you understand all this school planning stuff. He said, would that not be nice? So I applied for it, and that sort of changed my trajectory in the sense that was all consuming. To be a principal was totally different from being a teacher, because now you're working with adults, you're working with children, you're working with the community, and it was a steep learning curve.
Yes. Yeah. So what was it seems to me to go from that lovely environment of working with kids in a classroom to sitting in the office and making decisions about people's time, their ability to take time off, all the difficult management decisions, the budgets, etc. They're huge differences. So what made you believe that you could do that?
The opportunity came up. The vacancy was there. My husband said I'd be well able to do it. I thought I probably will be well able to do it. Yeah, I probably will be well able to do it. And I know the school, and I've been in the school, and it wasn't like that at all. And I'm it's just, there were so many little things. Now, at the time, in primary schools, it's usually, not always now, but it's usually the local priest or the parish priest is your manager. And I had a wonderful manager. He was so supportive. But then he was moved after a certain length of time. But there was a lot of challenges. There was a lot of people to be promoted, because there had been a lot of people had retired, etc. So a lot of that was quite contentious. And I was not prepared for it. I was not. I learned a lot. You learn on the job, But I didn't trust myself. I really felt overwhelmed by it.
Did you get any training, just as a matter of interest, to be a principal?
No. In those days, no, you didn't. There is now. But the school planning and that I'd been involved in, that would have been considered very beneficial. The fact that I'd been through that. But again, it didn't prepare me for everything. And I probably, looking back, could have done things differently and maybe moved slower, sometimes moved slower. There was one or two things that I probably could have just let go, and it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But without the experience, and I think though you have to, at this stage, now that I've retired from teaching, I can say to younger people taking on, you can't be too hard on yourself, because my job at that stage, it took up all of my time. Even though I had young children and everything, I'd come home from work, get things sorted, and get back out to what we'd put in the next policy. And it was late night work. It was very hectic. Now there is a little bit of more support there, but I may not have asked the right people for support. I may not have gone out and to other people quickly enough. And that would be advice I would give to younger people.
Yeah, so who could you have looked to for support at that time?
I could have looked to other people who had been principals. I could have looked to some of the people I'd worked with, in the INTO. But it was funny because sometimes you didn't want to let on the sort of difficulties that were going on in your school, and you didn't want to say it to anyone else. You're sort of a loyalty to the school, which is very conflicting. Yeah. Having said that, there was a great team. I was so fortunate with some of the people that I worked with, and we did bring about some of the changes, and we had a happy school. That's the main thing. Now, there were some parents that weren't happy with the way we did things, but we did our best. And I worked with a great team of teachers, secretary, caretaker, and SNAs. At this stage, we had another team of support in, and we tried to put the children first.
So it sounds like one of the things you're saying is when you move to something different, you can't be perfect at it in the beginning, and you have to accept that you will make mistakes. Am I picking that up correctly?
Yes, but it's good to know that before you go into the job, to realise that and to say that to people, and I just, it's okay to make mistakes. it's okay. You can't know everything yet. And it will take nearly a cycle of experience, a year of experience, another year of experience to build on it.
I've heard people say that one of the biggest challenges of moving into management in particular is that you had been part of a peer group and now all of a sudden you're in a management role with people who were formerly your friends. Was that your experience or?
That was something that I hadn't foreseen. And again, I put naivety with a capital N in front of that. I hadn't foreseen that. But yes, it did cause difficulty. Just simple little things. One day, two teachers were chatting after break. One of them was my friend. Two teachers were chatting on the corridor, and I said, "Oh, who's minding your class?" Meaning I'll go in, and she took real offence at it. To say, you can't even talk around here now. And that wasn't it. I was saying, they were obviously talking about something that needed to be talked about. And I would have gone in and covered the class. Instead of hearing what I was saying or me saying it so that she could hear it, it created tension. And it wasn't intended.
And I suppose it's that thing of how relationships have changed and somehow, yes, the balance of friendship and, authority. Changes the nature of relationship.
And I'm sure anybody would say, why mention it? But it's the little things that can really catch you, and you kind of say, did I not say that properly? And what could I have done differently? And I tended to blame myself a lot, which again is something that we need to say to younger people moving up through the system. Yes, we have to take responsibility, but we have to be fair to ourselves and kind to ourselves as well.
And that was a hard lesson for you to learn.
It took a while. It did. It took a while, and I was kind of fairly stressed now.
While you were doing all this, however, and were stressed, you went off and did a PhD.
But it was quite a while later, Lily, in the sense that we were getting on great. We had a great team in the school, fabulous people that were very supportive, and we had created a fabulous library, and our children were excited about books, and we had a lot of projects going. And then the recession came. And our teacher numbers got cut and everybody's morale went down, and my job was to keep morale up, and it was fairly difficult at around, I think the first year ever I wasn't enthusiastic about going back to school was 2010. I said, not again, here we go again. And I was and again, another friend happened the following summer. She said that there was this course going on through the outreach in Mayo Education Centre, and we could do this and we could learn. I loved language, she loved maths, and we could research them but be support to each other.
And was this part of a PhD?
This was
then?
the start.
It was the start.
This was the start of it. And again, people who are involved in research and maybe sharing how to research, they're very enthusiastic about what they do. So again, I met up with this group of not all teachers. Some were coming from a nursing background, but they all wanted to do research. And so met up with this group. Some of them were further along now. They were a few years into it. And I started with some others. And it just became this group that were supportive of each other. And there was a lot of learning. And, first of all, I think my tutor, kind of said to me, this isn't doctoral writing, it's not the standard. And it was a bit of a slap on the wrist. But again, we all said, the others, I told it to one of the others, she said, oh, we all got that. And there was encouragement. But the reason that I wanted to do it, when I heard about it, was I was feeling a bit deflated in the sense that we'd made such progress and now teacher numbers were taken away, classes got bigger, we didn't have the supports to give to the children, and I could feel it all slipping away. And I just needed to know, is there something we can do to support the children? And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to research what had other systems done to support children who were having difficulty in school.
It's fascinating to me because, somebody else in the similar situation might say, oh, that's it, I'm giving up, or I'm out of here, or, check out physically or psychologically. And instead of that, your response was, what more can I do to enhance both my own enjoyment of the job, but also enhance the environment for the kids?
Yeah, And like when I look back on it now, sometimes I think, you can have a leader and you talk about distributive leadership and all this. I think also there's something that I'm just finding out about. It's servant leadership. My type of leadership was, what can I do if I'm here? What will make this better? Which may not always be the kindest approach to yourself, but I really did think that it was my job to provide a better service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's servant leadership different from that?
Well, I think that you take a lot of the knocks without holding up your hand and saying this isn't good enough. That resources were taken away. We still manage. You still manage. You get this feeling, I have to get the job done, even though we'd lost 4 teachers in the cutbacks. And it wasn't possible to do the same job. But you try to do the same job, which puts a lot of pressure on you. So I knew it wasn't sustainable. So I said, I have to find out more. And that's where, and again, it was also to go and study with Lincoln through Mayo. It was an outlet. It was something to think about, that I used to box school off, at a certain time and then go and read whatever I had to read. And it was a way of getting through, to do something.
But it was also actually a way for you to not continue working yourself to the bone in the school.
There had to be.
It's really interesting.
There has to be another way. And again, I just met lovely people. But coming back to it, what I did in the school, I did with a great team. And, there was a fantastic team there.
You create team though, don't you, Jean?
Yeah.
I mean,
and sometimes teams create a leader as well.
Okay.
It works both ways. Yeah. But I do feel that the progress we made, where we made progress, we made it through great teamwork and people that were totally committed to doing a good job.
Lovely to hear. And you brought something to that. What was it that you brought to that ability for that team to contribute the way they did?
Well, I think one thing that I always was conscious of is that I always give credit where credit was due, in the sense that if somebody did something, they got acknowledged for it. And I also, if somebody had a problem, one of the things, if somebody had a problem or a difficulty, I think they all knew they could tell me and that it would never go any further, that was that. And the way it's good to be able to do that. So I think that they were the main things. And I worked hard, and I'd never ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do it myself, So
okay,
yeah.
So I'd love to go back to the bit where your friend prompted you to start the PhD. I hear it so often. It's a random comment from somebody. It's somebody spotting an interview or an ad in the paper and saying it to somebody else that actually puts them on a new track. And that's what happened for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was the support of the people there that helped you to continue.
The girl who said it to me, she actually changed paths then. She didn't do it. and I had already kind of said, I'll give it a go for a year. And I went through it like that for a little while. I'll give it a go. And then I was hooked. Yeah. But I started off trying to find out about how to make education more accessible to children. But what I really discovered was there's a huge difference between education and schooling. And it actually ended up more of kind of self-study. Part of it was a self-study about what I understood as education and what I understood as schooling, and where they merged and where they diverge. Schooling can be very led by government policy, and schooling can be a way of controlling people, or and it's a way of organising things, whereas education is much broader. Education, and I love this quote, education is to learn to live well in a world worth living in.
Wow.
So it's to live well ourselves, to have good relationships with others, but also to have a good relationship with the world. So that means that our policies, that we look after the environment, the relationships, social justice. That's what education is. It's deeper.
It's quite challenging, Jean, to hear you say that, because I suspect if you said that to lots of parents out there, that's what their kids needed to learn, they would contrast that with the notion of, no, they need to pass their exams and get the highest possible points to get into college. How would you respond to that?
I did it with my own children. You know, I can remember my eldest son had very little interest in studying and all the rest. And I can remember, you know, sitting down and saying, you need to do this, you know, you just need to get through the Leaving Cert, you know, or whatever. Now, and children will find their own place, but it's too worrying for parents. We've been conditioned like that as well. We've been conditioned, whereas, you know, there can be so many fresh starts, you know, and like, I think sometimes when children get to know themselves, know how they react with other people, find out what they're passionate about. Like, we've so much emphasis on reading and maths and STEM. What about dance and mime and music? That's all often extracurricular. Parents pay for that.
Yeah.
Whereas there's so many benefits to it. And it's just for us to start to think outside the box. I still firmly believe in the benefits of reading and being able to read, because then knowledge is, you know, you can access whatever you want. But we also have to get our children and ourselves to be critical about what we're reading and what we're listening to, particularly now as so much information is coming at people so quickly. And I think critical education and like philosophy for children is so important. You know, to present children with scenarios and to get them to think that there's no right or wrong answer. It's what do you think, and justify it. That's so important.
Absolutely.
Rather than just regurgitating for exams. So I understand exactly where parents are coming from. But I think we can have a balance. I think we can have a balance. And if the children don't go into a subject straight after school or into a career, a college pathway straight after school, there's time.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you even talked about your own sister, who went back later on after she saw you succeeding, I guess.
And realised that she had allowed a perceived barrier to hold her back. She thought because she didn't have music, she couldn't do it. Whereas even in those days, there was tapes and things to help you if you weren't a fabulous singer, you know. But the barrier, she let it block her. Whereas she realised afterwards, go for it. It doesn't matter if you don't get it. If you try, it's no big deal. But she didn't. So, and that happens so often because, like, even, you know, this whole idea of this imposter syndrome, I think very often we think, well, I haven't got all of the qualities, therefore I won't be able for it. Whereas, you know, we've got other qualities. Like, she went on to be a fantastic teacher, you know. Yeah. So it just shows
that sometimes the external requirements don't necessarily fit with what you have to bring to a particular role. Jean, there's so much more I would love to hear about and so on, but we've listeners out there who are young women with families in public service, nursing, teaching, who maybe are faced with dilemmas about, you know, how will they proceed with their career, opportunities present themselves for, you know, advancement or for further education, and yet they're struggling to decide, you know, how to take their next step. What advice would you give them?
I think that if it's something that they want to do, now, it mightn't be further education. It might be that they want to join a drama group and explore the dramatic side of their personalities, or a choir or whatever. But if there's something that you want to do, and if it is further study and to kind of change career, explore it, talk to people about it, and see where the support is. Because I think that openness, you know, to talk to people, I would like to do this. What do you think it would involve? Talk to people who have done it. Don't let barriers, explore the barriers. Really,
yeah, so sometimes we think a thought and then say, oh no, I couldn't, without actually speaking out publicly with family, with friends, with others, and saying, how can I do this? We've already stopped ourselves before we even allow that thought.
Yeah. And like some of the things that we want to do, you question yourself, why am I doing this? When I was doing my study towards the PhD, there were summer holidays and Saturday mornings, and I said, why are you doing this? You know, because it meant that I wasn't doing other things. So it was school, family, and then study. But at the same time, it was an itch. It was something that I wanted to do. And, you know, I did get huge benefit that also helps in other areas of life, you know. And it doesn't mean that everything goes smoothly, because after I retired, COVID came. And from going 24/7 to COVID, I was a bit lost, you know. So it happens, you know, and it's cyclical. And again, it's to talk to people. It's not to bottle it up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's fantastic advice. And that talking to can be family members. Sometimes it's good to talk to people outside of the family.
Exactly. Very much so. Very much so. Because sometimes you don't want to hurt your family or worry them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have somebody who is there to listen to you and to reflect back what you're saying, you can sort it out.
Okay. The younger you, if you were to speak to her now, the young Jean who started off as a teacher, is there anything you'd say to her that might have been important for her to hear?
I would say to tell her, believe in yourself. You are prepared. You are competent. Believe in yourself. I suffered a lot of worry and anxiety and thinking that I wasn't good enough. A lot of the time I felt I should have done that better. I could have done that better. Whereas I would say to her, be kinder to yourself. Don't be so harsh on yourself when you talk to yourself. And if you're doing your best, that's fine. That's fine. And that's what I would say to her. Don't worry so much, and don't always reflect. I know we put on a concert in school once, and the manager said afterwards that the sound wasn't great. Afterwards, years later, everything else had been great, but the sound at one part of the hall hadn't been great. That's all I remember. I can remember thinking, how are we going to improve the sound for the next time?
Yeah.
And you know, the way I used to always pick up on what didn't go well from my point of view. Whereas if it was somebody else, you wouldn't worry about it. But, you know, not to be hard on yourself and to believe.
And to find the positives.
Find the positives. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Okay, and very last question. I know you said there are things that you look to for support, for encouragement, for, you know, as a source for you. What would you recommend to people now from your current resources?
There's a poem called The Door, and it's just all about taking an action. Just go and open the door. Open the door. There might be nothing out there, but in the end, there'll be a draft. A draft will stir up a few papers round about. It's just take action. When you don't know what to do, reflect on it, but do something. Don't sit with uncertainty. Does that make sense?
That's Miroslav Holub, if I'm right?
Yes.
Beautiful poem.
I think so. And I think at various stages in our life, just to kind of say, I may not know what the action is just yet, but I will do something. And it will change. It will bring about change.
Change your energy.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Jean, thank you so much for coming today to speak to us on her next step. I have found this interview so inspiring, and I just wish it could have gone on for longer.
Well, it was a pleasure, and thank you very much for asking me, Lily. And it is nice, even though you're looking for people who've had non-linear careers like you've had, and I don't think mine has been that non-linear. It's kind of always had teaching and learning at the core. But I think it's great that you're providing an opportunity for people to hear other people's stories. And, you know, there's a great generosity in that. So I'm looking forward to hearing the other people that you are going to choose. So thank you, Lily.
great.
And it's a great opportunity to provide to people.
If you've enjoyed today's show, do like and share the podcast. If you'd like to hear more interviews with smart, ambitious, passionate women in the public service, you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. We welcome positive feedback and suggestions for future guests you'd like to hear from. Meantime, goodbye from me, Lily Murphy, and all the team at Her Next Step. Remember to look for the stepping stone that will support your next step, or consider how you could be the stepping stone for somebody else.